Cross-cultural variations in attachment is a topic in paper 1 AQA Psychology in the section of attachment. As you can see, the syllabus talks about including Van Inzendorn, meaning that this is a name study and they can ask you specifically about Van Inzendorn's myth analysis. So first of all, if you've studied Mary Ainsworth and the strange situation, it must be noted that Ainsworth initially started research cross-culturally, including in Uganda. She carried out a field study looking at 26 infant mother pairs, and what she found was the universality of attachment. She found that the same bonds that she saw in Western children were present in Uganda. She found that the maternal sensitivity that then she would use to explain the types of attachment in the strange situation was in fact a key factor in providing attachment in this non-Western culture. And therefore she said that although the expression of attachment might be different cross-culturally, the patterns of attachment are similar across cultures. And this is what we're looking into discovering, looking at cross-cultural variations in attachment. The main question is, are attachments more similar or dissimilar across cultures? Okay, there are universal aspects of culture, and then we'll see that there are culture-specific trends in attachment behavior. For example, we'll see that in Japan we've got a higher than average number of insecure resistant children, and in Germany there's a higher than average number of insecure avoidant children. These were cross-cultural studies all carried out using the strange situation model in lots of different countries. Now, the main study that we have to know about is Van Inzendorn and Cronenberg. I showed you previous studies just because one study might not be enough to describe the kind of breadth of cross-cultural research. So mentioning Ainsworth, Takasaki and Grossman beforehand might be worthwhile, having that awareness anyhow. The key study is Van Inzendorn and Cronenberg. The syllabus only mentioned Van Inzendorn, and this was a meta-analysis, means a study of lots of studies. In this case, they collated the findings from 32 studies with an overall sample of 2,000 child-parent pairs across 8 countries. You do want to know what these countries are, you do want to know these figures. And what they looked at is both differences within a country and across different countries. So they're looking at both features. Differences between countries would suggest that attachment is not universal. Differences within countries, again, suggest that attachment might not be dictated by country, but by other subcultural features. These are the main findings. So immediately you can see that the secure pattern of attachment was the most common in every single country. These are averages, obviously, so we don't have study by study, but we will see that in all research, secure attachment does seem to be the most predominant, although at different rates. What we see mostly is the variations in the 2 different subtypes of insecure attachment. Looking at more detail, one thing that you want to know for evaluation especially is the imbalance of representation. So we have, out of the 32 studies, 18 were from the United States. All the other studies are much smaller samples, and some of them have as little as 1 single study to represent them, meaning that it's really a snapshot and it's not really valid comparative data. And even the sample size, more than half of those 2,000 children were from the United States. As you can see, every single country shows a majority of secure attachment rates, but the variations in insecure attachments change. The most surprising figure is this study from China, where they have 50%, so the lowest rate of secure attachment, and then half and half of the remaining 50% was resistant or avoidant. But we have to also see that this was a one single study. Remember, meta-analysis are secondary data, so that study might have been carried out in families at risk, families with certain specific trends, and that might mean that it's not really representative at all of China as a whole. So These findings are explained through different child rearing practices. What we find is that in Western societies, children are more encouraged to be independent. These cultures are overall known as weird. This is a term that is mentioned in AQA notes, so it's worth knowing about. That means Western, educated, industrial, rich, and democratic. So it makes sense that in an industrialized society, there's a more focus on independence, personal gain, etc. This, it makes sense, that will lead to a higher than average rate of avoidant children potentially, and we see that especially in Germany. On the other hand, in collectivistic cultures, there's more emphasis on the family, the community. Codependency is not something negative, a desire to kind of contribute to the wider society rather than personal gain, and more interdependence. And that explains why we will find more rates of resistant attachment in those countries. Now, another interesting finding is in Van Inzendorn. What they found is that intracultural variations, for example, the differences between children living in urban and versus rural environments, were greater than the differences between cultures. So that means that within a culture, there are many subcultures that are more likely to influence the child rearing practices, and therefore the final child's attachment style compared to country by country. That means that a country might not represent a culture, and subcultures more salient in determining attachment compared to country. So moving on to evaluation. Obviously, the strengths of Van Inzendorn's meta-analysis is that all the studies used the same strange situation procedure, so it was all standardized, replicable, and highly reliable. As we know, the strange situation had a really high inter-rater reliability rate. And obviously, the large sample allows us to draw conclusions more confidently. In terms of limitations, as I mentioned before, there's a very uneven representation of the different countries. Some countries had 1 or 2 studies. America had the majority of studies, had more than half the sample. So obviously it's very difficult to generalize to some regions, and it's very difficult to compare and feel that the results are valid. Also, there's a big issue of using the strange situation, because in as much as it's highly reliable, it is culturally biased. There's an idea of what is right and wrong that is based on Western standards, on kind of Ainsworth and her team and her kind of way of thinking. That is what we would call an imposed ethic. That means that we can't really go into another culture, use our own standards, and draw conclusions as to whether their attachments are secure or insecure, because insecure has a negative connotation. So going to Japan and saying that a child is resistant, insecure resistant, when in fact for the child it's completely abnormal to be separated from the mother because they're always together, is a misconception. It's not a valid conclusion, and it also has socially sensitive implications. Also, we have publication bias. Van Inzendorn had to rely for his meta-analysis on secondary data that had been already collected by someone else. So we don't know to what extent the studies that he found were the ones that had been published, because they found more coherent results with the existing paradigm. And therefore, in other countries, there might be different findings that had been not published. Another factor is the languages. If the study was published but only in the language of origin, Van Inzendorn might have not had the means to use it, or might not have had the funding to use a translator, meaning that that research would have been discarded, and therefore, again, the data is not representative potentially of the whole body of knowledge, and definitely we can question its validity. Finally, you can develop further this point on imposed ethic in the strange situation. The methods developed in one culture are wrongly assumed to apply universally to others, and therefore we might have a misclassification, and you want to talk about this. This is a socially sensitive issue. It involves judging and potentially pathologizing parenting in certain cultures. It's extremely dangerous. So you could finish your essay on this on a cost-benefit analysis, saying that the costs of researching cultural variations might be higher than the benefits, because the risk is stigmatizing and pathologizing certain cultures when in fact we're overlooking the nature of their cultural customs.